Don't you dare hit me in the head. You know I'm not normal.
Why?
Everyone knows Curly Howard for his wild energy and famous laugh from The Three Stooges. But behind the comedy was a much darker story that nobody talked about for many years. The truth is that those head slaps and hammer blows weren't always fake. They were real hits that slowly destroyed his brain. Even worse, his own brother kept hitting him after doctors warned about the damage it was causing. Curly Howard was born Jerome Lester Horwitz on October 22, 1903, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. His parents had come to America from Lithuania, and they had 5 sons. 3 of those boys would become famous as Moe, Shemp, and Curly from The Three Stooges. Jerome was the youngest child, and his family called him Babe because he was quiet and well-behaved, unlike his wild older brothers who caused trouble. Even Moe continued calling him Babe into adulthood, but when Shemp married a woman also named Babe, the family had to give Jerome a new nickname to avoid confusion. That's how he became known as Curly. Even as a baby, Curly was getting dragged into his brother's crazy schemes. Once, Moe and Shemp took the wheels off his baby carriage and turned it into a racing cart. They raced him through the streets of Brooklyn until their parents caught them and scolded them. It was like a preview of the slapstick beatings he would take years later on camera. When Curly was 13 years old, something happened that would affect his body for the rest of his life. One summer day, he was playing with Moe's rifle. He sat on the ground with his legs crossed and pointed the gun at his own foot while messing with the trigger. The gun went off and the bullet hit his left ankle. Moe rushed him to the hospital where doctors thought they might need to cut off his foot. They didn't have to, but the injury gave him a permanent limp. Curly refused surgery because he was afraid it would make things worse. His left leg stayed thinner than his right leg, and his walk was never the same. Years later, he turned that limp into part of his comedy act by exaggerating it into a silly shuffle that fans loved. But that funny walk wasn't really an act. It came from real pain. People often think Curly was clumsy and out of shape, but as a teenager he was actually very athletic. He played basketball and was known for being quick and skilled with the ball. He also loved dancing, and became a regular at the Triangle Ballroom in Queens in the late 1920s. He was such a good dancer that people would stop to watch him. He could also sing and play the ukulele, and he knew how to make crowds smile. His body moved with rhythm and precision, which gave him perfect timing for the physical comedy he would later perform. He wasn't stumbling around randomly. He was in complete control. Before Curly ever stepped onto a stage himself, he spent years watching his brothers Moe and Shemp work in vaudeville with a comic named Ted Healy. Jerome followed them everywhere, not as a performer but as an observer. He stood backstage at every show, learning how jokes worked, how timing mattered, and how audiences reacted. For almost 4 years, he absorbed every detail like a sponge. He wasn't just waiting for his chance, he was preparing for it. That chance came in 1932, when Shemp finally got fed up with Ted Healy's drinking and nasty behavior. After a bad incident on stage, Shemp walked away from the act. Healy was desperate because his comedy group was falling apart, and he needed someone fast. Jerome showed up to audition with wavy red hair and a sharp mustache. He looked confident and clean-cut, but Healy wasn't impressed. He told Jerome, "You don't look funny enough." He wanted someone that audiences would laugh at the moment they walked on stage. Jerome didn't argue or try to convince him. He just walked out of the building, but he didn't go home. Instead, he went straight to a barber shop and told the barber to shave everything off. Half an hour later, Jerome walked back into Healy's office completely bald. The change was shocking. He didn't say much, just stood there while Healy stared at him in amazement. In that moment, Jerome had sacrificed his appearance for the chance to be funny, and it worked. Healy hired him on the spot. For 12 years, the brothers had been sidekicks, always in the background under someone else's name. But in March 1934, Moe Howard saw a chance to break free. Ted Healy was about to renew his contract with MGM, but the studio only wanted Healy, not the Stooges. Moe knew that meant they would keep getting scraps while Healy took all the credit and money. So Moe went straight to Healy and told him they were leaving. It was a clean break that ended one of the longest partnerships in vaudeville, but it also started something new. The Three Stooges were finally on their own. They didn't waste any time. Within months, the Stooges signed with Columbia Pictures. It was 1934, and their first film was called Woman Haters. It wasn't even written for them, but it worked. Then came Punch Drunks, their second short film, which changed everything. Columbia gave them a 7-year deal worth $60,000 per year, which was a big jump up. Their third short, Men in Black, even got nominated for an Oscar for Best Short Subject Comedy. They didn't win, but the nomination alone gave them credibility. They weren't just funny anymore, they were stars. Behind the scenes, though, Columbia had a different plan. On paper, each stooge made $20,500 per film, which was 5 times the standard rate. But there was a catch. The studio only gave them 1-year contracts. Every year they had to renegotiate. And every year Harry Cohn, the head of Columbia, reminded them that comedy shorts were supposedly on their way out. For 23 years, they stayed on those short contracts, believing the studio was doing them a favor. But Columbia was actually keeping them trapped with low pay while making huge profits from their work. Still, the Stooges kept making great films. Between 1934 and 1946, they made 97 shorts during what became their golden era. They gave the world classics like Hoi Polloi, where they tried to become gentlemen, and A Plumbing We Will Go, where they turned a simple house call into complete chaos. Violent is the word for Curly had them singing and swinging through the alphabet in a scene that stuck in fans' minds for decades. During those years, Curly Howard stood out the most. Audiences loved his voice, his silly reactions, and his wild energy. But behind that slapstick madness was a slow-motion tragedy quietly unfolding while the cameras kept rolling. Every time he let someone hit him on the head with a hammer or break a prop over his skull, the audience cheered because it became his trademark. But those gags weren't just jokes. They were real blows that kept happening over and over until the damage started piling up inside his brain. Doctors now call this condition CTE, but back then no one cared about it. His pain was invisible, and the jokes were too profitable to stop. One day during filming of a hospital sketch, the crew tilted a gurney too far, and Curly fell off. His head slammed into the edge of a prop window frame and split his scalp open, requiring 9 stitches. They patched him up, pulled his collar up to hide the wound, and kept filming. The show couldn't wait, even for a serious injury. Most of that pain came from one man, his own brother, Moe. Moe wasn't faking the slaps, eye pokes, and punches. They were real, and he hurt Curly on camera over and over because that's what sold tickets. What made it even worse was that Moe also helped Curly backstage when he couldn't remember his lines. He would guide him through scenes when his brain started failing, then turn around and hit him again in the next take. The same hand that helped him up also knocked him down, and Curly never complained. By 1942, his brain was already breaking down. He had tiny hemorrhages, slow reactions, slurred words, and a deeper voice. His sparkle was fading, and it showed on screen. Columbia Pictures didn't care at all. Studio boss Harry Cohn refused to give him time off. He didn't see a man, just a money machine with a cracked engine that needed to keep running. Long before his health collapsed, something else had already been taken from Curly: his identity. When he joined the act, he had thick brown hair and a mustache, but Ted Healy wanted a bald comic. So Curly shaved it all off, right down to the skin, and he hated how it looked. He thought it made him ugly, unlovable, and less of a man. He wore hats in public and avoided looking at himself in mirrors. People laughed at the bald guy on screen, but the man underneath was quietly ashamed of how he looked. Curly's love life was a disaster from the very beginning. His first marriage was so bad, it was annulled after just 5 months. He thought he had found something real when he married Elaine Ackerman on June 7, 1937, the same date his brother Moe had gotten married 12 years earlier. They had a daughter named Marilyn in 1938, but the marriage didn't last, and they divorced in 1940. He tried again in 1945, marrying Marion Buxbaum after knowing her for only 2 weeks. That marriage was a complete disaster filled with constant fights, accusations, and public humiliation. It lasted just 9 months before Marion dragged him through a brutal divorce. She went to the newspapers, insulted him publicly, and even falsely accused him of never bathing. His health was already shaky, and the stress made everything worse. His last marriage to Valerie Newman in 1947 brought some peace to his life. They had a daughter named Janie in 1948, but by then Curly's health had taken too many hits. The strokes had changed everything about him, and he wasn't the same man anymore. Curly didn't just have bad luck with women. He was a target for people who wanted to use him. Fame and money attracted the wrong kind of attention, and Curly couldn't see it coming. Norman Maurer, who knew him well, said that a pretty woman could say a few sweet words, and Curly would fall for it completely. Then she would take his money and disappear. He wasn't smooth or confident with women. He was shy, awkward, and desperate to be loved, and women figured that out quickly and used it against him. Since he didn't know how to talk to women naturally, he would just respond to whoever approached him, which opened the door to disaster. Marion Buxbaum was a perfect example of this pattern. She saw his fame and money and went after him like a predator. People around Curly knew exactly what was happening and said so openly. These women didn't love Curly. They loved what he represented, a movie star with no defenses who could be easily manipulated. Behind all the laughter and fame, Curly was falling apart. When the cameras weren't rolling, he was drinking heavily. Mo had banned drinking at work, but Curly made up for it after hours by hitting the nightclubs hard. Food, alcohol, and parties became his way of escaping his problems. During World War II, the schedule was brutal, as the Stooges spent months on the road entertaining troops. That PR, ashore broke him down even faster, and alcohol became his medicine. He didn't just drink too much, he also spent money like there was no tomorrow. Wine, food, women, and real estate swallowed up his paychecks, even though he was paid well. Each Stooge got $2,500 per short film, which was more than most actors made, but Curly was always broke because he couldn't manage money. Mo had to step in and start handling Curly's taxes and budgets just to stop the financial bleeding. One of his most damaging habits was buying and selling houses. Curly bought houses like candy. If a smooth-talking real estate agent said something nice, he would sell his current place and buy a new one without thinking about it. Norman Maurer watched this happen repeatedly and saw that agents targeted Curly on purpose because they knew he would give in to pressure. He never paused to think about long-term costs because he just wanted to please people, and that weakness made him an easy target. This wasn't just about houses. It was about his complete lack of control over his own life. Curly couldn't say no to anyone. He couldn't stand his ground when people came into his life with confidence and charm. They would leave with his money, his home, and pieces of his spirit. Even basic things like shelter and security kept slipping out of his hands. The cycle repeated over and over until Mo had to step in again. But by then, the damage had spread to every part of Curly's life. His finances were wrecked, his health was failing, and his heart was broken. By 1944, the change in Curly Howard was impossible to ignore. His energy, which had once been the driving force of the Three Stooges, had drained out of him completely. You could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, and feel it in the way he moved. The wild man with spring-loaded limbs had slowed down dramatically. His high-pitched voice that had made children laugh now sounded like gravel, and the quick footwork and perfect timing that had once defined him was now a struggle. In films like Idle Rumors and Booby Dupes, the difference was painful to watch. He looked like he was trying to swim through wet cement. It all happened incredibly fast. Within just a few months, Curly went from full-speed chaos to barely being able to move. But the cameras kept rolling and no one stopped production, even when it was clear he could barely keep up. Something even worse was happening to his mind. Curly had never been great at remembering lines, but this wasn't just normal forgetfulness anymore. He would show up on set completely confused, not knowing what movie they were filming or who his character was supposed to be. Director Edward Burns had to work around him, and Mo would take him aside and walk him through every line, scene by scene. He did it patiently, like helping a child. It became a daily ritual with Mo guiding Curly while everyone watched, but no one would say what they were really thinking. Between October 1944 and March 1945, something inside Curly broke completely. Looking back, doctors now believe that's when he suffered his first stroke, but it went unnoticed and undiagnosed at the time. You can actually see the difference if you compare his films from that period. He was filming Idiots Deluxe one day and then struggling through If a Body Meets a Body the next. The contrast between those two performances was like night and day. You could almost pinpoint the exact moment the stroke changed him, yet no one called a doctor. He just kept working. In January 1945, Moe finally dragged him to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, where doctors didn't hold back with their diagnosis. Curly had severe high blood pressure, a hemorrhage in his eye, and dangerous obesity. His blood pressure was so high it could have killed him at any moment, and his eyesight was failing. His body was breaking down on every level. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was a complete system-wide collapse that you don't recover from with a few days of rest. But Columbia Pictures didn't care about any of this. Harry Cohn, the studio president, was told everything about Curly's condition. He knew exactly how serious it was, but he still refused to give Curly time off. When Moe begged him and even started crying, Cohn said no. Profits came first, and he needed the next Stooge film on schedule. That decision cost Curly everything, and eventually it cost Cohn too, because the films that followed were disasters. You could see Curly fading away on screen, and the life was draining from the very product Cohn was trying to sell. In 1945, Columbia finally had to slow down production. They went from making 6 to 8 Stooge shorts per year to just 5. But it wasn't because they wanted to. It was because Curly simply couldn't handle the workload anymore. That hospital visit had forced them to face the truth that he wasn't coming back to his old self. Not ever. But the worst was still ahead. From August 1945 to January 1946, the Stooges went on a brutal tour with daily shows in New York City. There was no rest and no time off, just relentless performances where Curly was expected to fall down, jump up, run, twist, scream, and play the fool over and over again. This wasn't just stage work, it was physical punishment. He did it for the soldiers and the war effort because he believed in it, but it destroyed what was left of his health. During that same tour, he married Marion Buxbaum after knowing her for just 2 weeks. She had a son and clearly saw an easy target in Curly, who was weak, desperate for love, and not thinking clearly. He showered her with expensive gifts, including a $3,500 mink coat, a $2,000 bracelet, and a new house. The marriage fell apart within 3 months, and she insulted him, humiliated him, and took him to court. Even the judge called her a gold digger and told her to leave Los Angeles. Curly came out of that experience even more broken than before. By early 1946, he returned to Los Angeles, but he wasn't really back. Not the Curly people knew and loved. He was thin and gaunt. His face had aged 10 years in just 1 year. His voice was weak and his movements were stiff. He only worked 24 filming days between February and May, and even that was too much for him. He was taking weeks off between shoots just to survive. Everyone on the crew could see it. Moe could see it, and everyone knew that Curly was dying in front of them. Yet the cameras kept rolling because Columbia wouldn't stop production until he physically couldn't stand up anymore. You can actually watch his decline happen in his final films. In Monkey Businessmen, Moe had to whisper Curly's lines to him during takes. In Beer Barrel Polecats and Uncivil Warbirds, he barely moves at all. Directors started cutting him out of scenes and rewrote scripts so that Moe and Larry carried all the comedy. Curly would just stand there trying to smile and hold on, but the spark was completely gone. Then came Three Little Pirates, where somehow, for just a moment, Curly came alive again. He was funny, he was fast, and he was the old Curly that everyone remembered. It was the last time he would ever be that way, and that short film gave everyone false hope that maybe he was getting better. On May 6, 1946, the set was ready for what would become Curly's final scene. The script was locked, dozens of pies were waiting to fly, and this was going to be the big ending of Half-Wit's Holiday, the 97th Three Stooges short film. The stage looked like a battlefield with big canvas sheets surrounding the area, ready for complete chaos. Curly Howard, the man behind the wildest gags and the most famous nyuk in comedy history, was about to shoot his last pie fight scene. Nobody knew it at the time, but this was his final act. He wasn't well during the filming. Curly kept looking off camera and needed cues from director Jules White just to say a line or move in the right direction. His scenes were getting trimmed and Larry was picking up his parts. It was obvious to everyone that something was seriously wrong, but no one dared to say it out loud. Then everything collapsed. When the assistant director called for Curly to come do his scene, there was no response. Moe went looking for him and found him slumped in Jules White's chair with his head dropped and his eyes empty. His mouth was twisted unnaturally. He couldn't speak, and he couldn't move. All he could do was cry. The stroke had hit him hard, and it didn't just pause his career, it ended it completely. The man who had once danced across the screen with lightning speed was now frozen, his voice reduced to broken sounds. The reaction on set wasn't shock or mourning. Jules White didn't stop production or even announce what had happened. He just rewrote the scene so that Moe and Larry took Curly's lines, and filming continued like nothing had happened. They patched together reaction shots from earlier takes, and no one outside the core crew was told the truth. One of comedy's brightest stars had just fallen, and the cameras didn't even pause. Doctors confirmed the worst fears. Curly had suffered a massive stroke that affected his brain severely. He couldn't walk properly, couldn't talk clearly, and his reflexes were gone. The high-energy comedian who used to spin, leap, and yell his way into every laugh was now just a shell of that man. He was sent to a hospital for industry veterans in Woodland Hills, where his condition kept getting worse. By 1948, he had another stroke that destroyed what little he had left. He could barely move his arms and needed a wheelchair to get around. His hand would slide off the armrest and he couldn't lift it. To back up. His voice faded into garbled sounds that his wife and family had to guess at, and most of the time they guessed wrong about what he was trying to say. His diet became a form of punishment as doctors stripped it down to just boiled rice and apples, nothing else. They were trying to keep his blood pressure down and control his weight, but that simple meal plan broke more than just his eating routine. It broke his spirit. The man who had once dined at fancy clubs and laughed over lavish meals was now being spoon-fed bland food while sitting in a hospital chair. Things got even worse in December 1951 when the nursing home staff said they couldn't take care of him anymore. They told his family that he was becoming too much of a burden and should be moved to a mental institution. That was the final insult. Moe refused to let that happen and took Curly to another facility himself, making sure his brother would be treated with at least some dignity in his final days. By that point, Curly couldn't speak at all. He couldn't ask for what he wanted or needed. If he understood something, he might squeeze Moe's hand or blink his eyes, but that was it. The man who used to light up movie screens with "Certainly" and "woo woo woo" was now trapped in complete silence. One time, he kept motioning for something that no one could figure out. It took forever before someone realized that all he wanted was a bowl of ice cream. When they finally brought it to him, he cried. On January 7, 1952, Moe got a phone call while he was on a film set saying that Curly needed to be moved to yet another facility. He rushed over to help, but it was too late to make any real difference. 11 days later, on January 18th, Curly died from a massive brain hemorrhage. He was only 48 years old. His body had finally given up, but his legacy remained strong. He had made over 100 comedy shorts and created a character that generations of people would imitate and love. But in the end, the man who had given the world so much laughter was left to die quietly, far from the stage and far from the spotlight, with no final joke to deliver. His story ended not with applause and laughter, but with silence and sadness. The tragedy of Curly Howard shows us the dark side of entertainment, and how the people who make us laugh often pay a terrible price for our enjoyment. His story is a reminder that behind every funny face might be real pain, and that fame and success don't always lead to happiness.